Hello everyone, it's your favorite West Virginia out in space here, and honestly, I kind of wanted to make a video on this video, or talk about it for a while, because it's just really that bad if you really think about it for a while, but I've always held off on it because I just didn't, but until recently when two of my friends independently kind of brought it up, randomly on the same day, I knew, yep, I gotta do this. So yeah, we're going to be discussing / criticizing Lily Orchard's video on Stop Writing Sympathetic Villains, They Suck, because, well, let's just be honest, she got quite a bit wrong here about both sympathetic villains, especially Magneto, and also how far one can go in the name of good and still be good rather than fall into villainy. Anyway, let's begin. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of a misconception that Lily shows, or at the very least it seems to have, that a lot of people kind of mess up, so I've also seen in other places too, is the idea that all sympathetic villains are people who are fighting against the status quo because of some noble reason, when that just isn't true. Like, sympathetic villains is literally just meaning a villain who has sympathetic qualities. That can be literally anything. It could be anything from, like, once again, present there as like, oh, they're discriminated against and they want to have justice in that regard. It could be they've been personally slighted by someone, you can understand it. You can understand, like, it could be like any number of things, like, or just like they could be really charismatic to the point they become sympathetic. And there's a lot of things you can do that can cause someone to be sympathetic, and you can't just boil it down to one thing. But even more broadly, sympathetic is a loose concept as it is, because it's kind of ironic to have a spectrum of sympathetic characters. Now, not just like on one end there's pure evil villains, and the other there's sympathetic goody two-shoe boys who are really not evil at all. It's a bit more complicated than that. You see, a sympathetic villain is just, like it says, a villain with sympathetic qualities, which can really range from how sympathetic the level is, so to speak. On like one end, you can have villains that really only have one or two redeeming traits, and they aren't really, and they're very close to pure evil villains, just barely shy of it. And then you have other ones that are so very, very close to really being on the side of good that they really aren't villains at that point. Although realistically, instead of crossing the line to being good guy, they cross the line to being more antagonists rather than villains. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But the point is, there's a whole spectrum kind of in between that, and a lot of characters can shift, especially depending on how much you view them as sympathetic. But the general idea is that they aren't pure Machiavellian evil. They are, on some level, not purely evil and have some, at least moderately redeeming qualities. However, this doesn't even have to mean their point could be any close to right. They could have completely evil motivations with no sympathetic reason behind them, but have some other traits beside them. Ironically enough, I use Bowser from the Mario series, but at least some of the time, he really cares for Bowser Jr., but his goal of conquering the kingdom is still evil, his methods to do it are still evil, and he really has no good reason to do it, but yet he's kind of funny, he has a fun personality sometimes, and he sometimes cares for his son, and so that kind of makes him sympathetic sometimes. You see, it's all about what makes someone sympathetic. But the thing is, being sympathetic doesn't make you right. Once again, not necessarily. Once again, Bowser, for example, is completely in the wrong in his actions, but yet he still kind of has sympathetic qualities to him. In fact, those are going to be some of the most compelling sympathetic villains, the ones who really aren't doing anything good, but yet you kind of understand them. Ironically enough, I kind of use Loki as an example of this. His actual goals and motivations are pretty messed up most of the time, world conquest, all that jazz, but in the first Thor movie, you really feel for Loki, how he's been betrayed and by pretty much everyone, slighted, and all these lies. And though his goals are completely evil, you understand how he got there, making him a sympathetic villain. But ultimately, that does actually move to another Marvel character that is kind of the namesake for this video. Magneto. A quick mention of going forward. I don't know really anything about Avatar, so I can't really comment on those villains specifically, and I only know barely about Ruby, and let's be honest, I've seen only a little bit of it, and let's be perfectly honest here, given the nature of the writing in that show, it's so hard to tell what's intentional, actual mistakes. It's just, I can't really comment on that. It's way too complicated for me to even begin to touch there, but I can talk Magneto, because I know Magneto, and Magneto is one of my favorite supervillains ever. He's easily one of the most entertaining supervillains ever brought to page or film, and let's be honest here, he's great, and part of what makes him so great is his sympathetic motivation. You understand why Magneto is the way he is. There's a lot to make him great, but the motivation, which is sympathetic, is also, it also helps that a lot of time his personality is very charismatic. He's not always a mild, maniacal villain who laughs at the torturing of puppies. He oftentimes genuinely thinks he's doing the best thing that can be done. But that's the complexity with Magneto, isn't it? Is that at this fundamental core, Magneto is just as bad as the people he fights against. I know that sounds messed up, but it's true. The whole point of Magneto's character is that he's a man so desperate to avoid what happened to him happening again, or people like him, that he inadvertently, knowingly or not, becomes that same kind of evil. Magneto, after all, wants to fight against humanity because they want to persecute mutants like happened to him, and so his methods are often to enslave or imprison or kill all humans, not just those who oppose him, but just them in general, to prevent it ever from happening again. That's literally just very close, if not identical, to what happened to him. And that's the point. He's a man pushed so far, he becomes the very thing he fights against. And that's what's so compelling, is that you understand how he got to that point. It's not just, oh, I'm a Nazi under a different name. It's that you understand how he got to that point, and you feel bad for him. And you can honestly respect, if you were put in his shoes, you'd probably come to a similar conclusion. But yet, that's what makes him so compelling, is that you know, on some level, he doesn't really want that either. It's just, that's what he thinks has to be done. Now, granted, some amount of his sympathy does shift on Ryder, and we do not speak of the Ultimate Comics, but overall, that's what makes Magneto so compelling. There's other things, of course, but that's what makes it work. That's what makes him work. But the thing is, he is a villain through and through. In fact, as some people point out, he ultimately ends up becoming the thing he fears, not just because he becomes, you know, a literal fascist for all intents and purposes, or at the very least a horrible bigot against humanity, but also because he literally gives the humans reasons to fear mutants. All anyone who wants to oppress mutants has to say is, look at Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants. They are literally wanting to oppress and enslave humanity or kill us all off. We have to build Sentinels, we have to fight them, we have to do this and this. Magneto, knowingly or not, depending on version, is literally giving ammo to any human who wants to hate mutants. So he's unironically basically a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. He thinks humans will end up oppressing him, so he basically gives them reason and name to try to stop them, which is ultimately adds to the tragic nature of his character. Also, one other thing I want to talk over, is that literally it says that the X-Men and Xavier are just pushers of the status quo, when, like, no. Like, Xavier and the X-Men are fighting for mutants not to be oppressed and to give them equality and all that jazz. Did you just miss that part? They aren't just like, oh, everything's fine. It's that, hey, maybe becoming a supervillain to do that is a terrible method of doing it. You know, almost like, you know, read an X-Men story or watch a movie once and you kind of understand that. I don't know how you missed that part. It's like literally one of the biggest reasons why the X-Men were even formed in any version of the story. So they could, you know, try to show the world that mutants were just like everyone else. I don't know. Once again, how did you miss that? It's very much a cool part of the comics. I don't really understand how you missed that. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is the idea, or presented / stated, however you want to word that anyone fighting against the status quo or fighting to fight against oppression or just any kind of vague good cause can never be in the wrong. They are always doing right no matter what they do. And that is just, boy, that's a bad methodology, because first of all, no matter how noble your goals, you can always go too far. You can always end up doing bad things or the wrong thing. And that's not something that we really like to think about. We generally do not like to think that people with good motivations can truly be doing bad, knowingly or not. And I'm not suggesting through some method of, oh, well, I say I'm trying to do a good thing, but in reality, I'm actually doing things evil on purpose and just hiding my evil. No, I mean, people can legitimately think they're doing the right thing when in reality doing the wrong thing, or at least causing more damage than good. There's always going too far. It's sad. It's one of those truly tragic things. But like a great example of it, I think, would be like, let's say it's World War II and you're trying to destroy the Nazis. That is a noble, good thing to do. But saying, oh, releasing a virus that will kill every single German indiscriminately of what they were doing, no, you went too far. You're trying to kill millions of innocent people to do, even in the name of doing the right thing. I think a great example would be Warhammer 40k, and to a slightly lesser extent Warhammer Fantasy. The Empire or Imperium of Man is not a good place to live. It varies depending on writer, but it really does suck in most cases to live in. However, and you can understand saying one, to rebel against a system or trying to reform it to something better. Obviously, there's definitely a way both could be improved. However, joining the forces of chaos, aka essentially hell with demons and all that jazz, is not a good way to do it. You you have become worse than the thing you were fighting against. That is a bit more of a fictional example, but it works very well because that's a law of it. That's at least when the cultists are trying to be weird with this like more understandable motivation. And then we kind of get to the idea kind of kicked around by Lily, and I've seen from plenty of other people, that trying to change or resist or break the status quo is a moral good in of itself, when it just isn't. The status quo is effectively, in all intents and purposes, just means what is existed. It just means what is consistent or still around. And to resist it or break it is just to represent change. Now, granted, there can be good change. You can obviously resist the status quo to do good, but you could just as easily break the status quo, either by trying to change it to something worse or not understanding what you broke. That is definitely something that can happen, because history and real life are complicated, but change or stagnation, either way, or staying stable would be a better term, are not inherently good, linked to good or evil. They are simply concepts of either to change or not to change from something before, and that can be good or bad either way. But idolizing one as the truest virtue of good will always lead to disaster. You'll either ignore problems as they happen or fail to make things better, or you'll destroy things indiscriminately and not realize the damage you've done. And that bleeds over to the final and kind of last point of this whole thing, is that if you firmly and truly believe you can't do any wrong, or a group can't do anything wrong, or you're always in the right, you will inevitably end up doing wrong. You'll end up being evil. Because if you truly do not believe you can't be evil, then you won't realize when you're going to do something bad, or you have done something bad. Like, for example, if you could look back in your entire life and think to yourself, what if at every point in my life, when I made a mistake, I thought I couldn't make this mistake, and then would assume that my mistake was actually the right thing to do? You would probably turn out to be a much worse person, or not understand things. And this is on a personal scale, is that we're all fallible. Even when trying to accomplish the most noble of goods, we can end up doing wrong, especially if we do not believe we can do wrong, as that is literally the concept of pride, or at least one major manifestation of it, believing you can't be wrong or can't fail. That is a huge concept that ultimately ignoring or risking or trying to encourage that kind of mentality that you can't be wrong will always lead to disaster, no matter how good or noble or pure your intentions. But ultimately, that's just my thoughts on the video. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below and all that jazz. Please like it and comment if you did like it and all jazz. And if you didn't like, dislike and comment how much I suck. I don't care either way. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.